In the tradition of Malcolm X, peace be unto you. Some of you may be wondering exactly what number of political parties exist in the United States. I'm going to show you a list of 9, you can see. And at the top, we have the Democratic Party, followed by the Republican Party, then the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Constitution Party, the Alliance Party, the American Party, Independence and Delta parties that disaffiliated in 2021, the Socialist Party, founded in 1901, and the Communist Party, founded in 1919. The two primary parties that dominate the political scene or stage today are the Democratic Party, consisting of neoliberals who have moved the Democratic Party away from its liberal roots. And I have to be careful here because we know the Democratic Party was the most racist, white supremacist, overt white supremacist party in the United States when it was founded by Andrew Jackson. So they phased into a more liberal kind of image, and then they phased under Bill Clinton especially into the neoliberal, which is pretty much indistinguishable from the conservative Republican Party of today in many ways. That is to say, it's all about power and increase in global control of natural resources in other countries. So those are some of the political parties. There are probably a few small political parties which are getting no traction. Each of these political parties do have domestic and international agenda, plans, policies. Both domestic and international agenda have always been, and let me reemphasize that, always been inimical to African American interests and imply the true design of the United States and its policies for African Americans. And of course, if you really want to get the essence of what that is, you just go right to the Constitution of the United States, the point of inception, and you read Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. You read those, and you will see what the design at the beginning of this nation was for African Americans. Now, of course, circumstances have changed, but the servitude and the dependence that African Americans have on the power elite have not changed. Now, the 4 million illegal immigrants which have crossed the border since Joseph Biden took office is a current example. That is by design. Because of the birth rate in the United States, the plummeting birth rate, because of the need for recruits into the military, and of course, cheap labor, millions of people from South American countries are being allowed into the country and given money, given financial support, just as Ukrainians were allowed in, and given apartments to live in and given Social Security immediately. But who exactly sets the agenda for neoliberal Democrats and extremist conservative Republicans? For both corporate profit interests of shareholders, who are the owners, are the priority. That's your priority. Shareholders are the owners of these corporations, and they have one thing in mind when they invest their money. They want dividends. They want returns for their investment. They want profit. And that is the sole purpose of a for-profit corporation. It is they who set the agenda. And so as we go through this talk of mine, we're going to find that Congress is controlled by corporate America, and you can throw in the corporations that make up the military-industrial complex. They control Congress. People in Congress come and go. Presidents come and go. Bureaucrats come and go. But the corporate power, the shareholders, stockholders of these corporations remain constant over generations unless the corporation dies, which in some instances does happen. But you have a lot of cross-generational wealth passed over to descendants of shareholders. And thus the agenda doesn't change. And so the condition of African Americans, that the conditions that grip the lives of African Americans do not change. With one hand, politicians working for corporations indirectly use trivial diversionary issues such as whether both genders can use the same public restroom, who gives a flying duck's quack, or whether dysphoric personality is actually normal, while with the other hand, they loot the public treasury, commit fraud, embezzle, practice stock market insider trading, commit murder overseas and of U.S. citizens, and destroy whole nation states by military force, such as Libya. All black people are manipulated by a variety of ways on the respective political stage or stages by mainstream political interests or parties. And I'm including the Socialist and the Communist Party. They have committed murder over the past 100 years. They have committed terrorist acts, claiming to be fighting capitalism, the ideology. So they are not without blood on their hands. But those mainstream political parties manipulate the masses in a variety of ways. For the masses, they are primarily emotionally manipulated to identify with a political brand or symbol. People are very much attracted to symbols and what suggests to them meaning, what suggests an explanation for the condition of their lives, which of course are constructed by people who construct symbols. At other times, it is manipulation of one's ambition or passion for distinction. That is something that every human being to some degree has. But mass media has become very, very expert at projecting onto our consciousness, our collective consciousness, shadowy figureheads such as Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, Jamie Harrison, Hakeem Jeffries, leader of the Democratic Party, Republican Tim Scott, and others in the House of Representatives. They are not what they are made out to be in mainstream media and by their handlers. Some of you may say, well, how is it people are falling for this? Why is it that they cannot discern the shadowy figureheads from authentic and sincere individuals who teach the truth? Well, some of you may know that a week or so ago, a YouTube influencer by the name of Polite, I think his last name is Noack, was sentenced to 7 years for child abuse in a Florida state prison. Now, for over 10 years, that individual committed fraud of various kinds against African Americans. I mean, extreme con. And there were hundreds and hundreds of African Americans who bought into it and sent him money for ridiculous claims that he made about having one's own sovereignty, being outside the jurisdiction of the United States, sovereign citizens. It was a complete fallacious claim that he made, which he sold, and people fell for it. And I can go into naming many other Ponzi schemes that people have fallen for in the United States over the years. Should you be surprised that millions of Americans fall for the propaganda, fall for the scam of politicians? They do it at every election. You can see the pattern. It's very clear. They apply the same formula, and whether you inform people or not, they pretty much get the same results. People become rabid when they start to identify with one of the political parties, one of the mainstream political parties, one of their one of the brands. They pick up their symbols, and they are on a holy war to get a person or group of people in office who will do the same thing to them that they've been doing for centuries. Those persons are prime examples of how racial appearance in relation to African Americans is used by political parties to emotionally manipulate African American voters. Such individuals are used to create the illusion that black people are leaders and have political power. The political power to choose who they want to be in Congress. It is all an illusion. We do not have a democracy. You can see that in the Constitution as well if you read it carefully. And so here we are, choosing from illusory subjects, and we get no results. But the truth is, and it may be very difficult for many people to face this, that there is no present or future prospect for African American leadership at the state or federal levels of political action because black people have no real power in the United States. No real power in the United States. You can see that on many of the YouTube channels and on many other platforms that are not affiliated with YouTube, that what most African Americans do is pretend to know something and have a tin cup in their hand. Internet beggars. African Americans in the United States are wholly dependent people, even if they are billionaires. At most, politicians and billionaires are gloves in which fit white hands. African Americans have been programmed for and conditioned to follow, not to lead. Now we are exhorted by President Biden, for instance, to follow the Latino community and its perspective. Learn Spanish. Listen to this. Listen as Joe Biden talks down to some African American figureheads at the dawn of his presidency in 2021.
The country is doomed. It is doomed not just because of African Americans, but because by 2040, this country is going to be minority white European. Hear me? Minority white European. And you guys are going to have to start working more with Hispanics, who make up a larger portion of the population. Y'all do.
Latino population in the United States, as was stated clearly by Mr. Biden, the power base for the mainstream political parties will be Latino. The African American population is decreasing at a pretty constant rate. It is probably right now at 1.6 fertility rate, and it's going down. So we're moving in the opposite direction. We're not growing. And so our political voice, whatever little there may be, at least the political voice to criticize, is diminishing. White supremacists have stripped away virtue, the word virtue, from our vocabulary. Have you noticed that? And they've stripped that away from public discourse, down to their morality, that there is no right and wrong, and that, of course, might makes right. Young people have no concept of virtue, none. And they have inherited that orientation from their parents. And they will pass it on to their children, that there is no right and wrong, that it depends on the individual. Your lifestyle is right for you, and no one can tell you that there's a standard for a lifestyle that is healthy and spiritually oriented. And this is not something you have to read 2 or 3 dozen books to see. You can just turn on the internet and you can see exactly by the behavior of young African Americans where this is all headed. The only way that African Americans can learn to lead and then to lead themselves out of their present condition is to form their own pragmatic political parties in their own neighborhoods so that they can pave their own way. Do I think that that will happen in my lifetime? No. I see no signs. I have no material evidence that African Americans generally are getting the point. You will never organize for the good of all African Americans clinging to your Bronze Age religion. You won't, because it's divisive. It's divisive. It's not unitary. Bronze Age mythology, Eurocentric denominational forms of Christianity, European political ideologies, and derivative Eurocentric philosophies are dead. And let me say this, for all the so-called imams teaching Islam, they're dead. They're not teaching Islam in the vibrant manner that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did. There is not a single imam in the United States that is going to teach you the essence of Islam, because they don't know. They could easily transfer to become a Baptist preacher. Other than the concept of the Trinity, you could be hard pressed to distinguish how they relish in the history and ethnic victories at war 1,000 years ago, ancient dead empires. So you have a basic common problem in the religious sector of our society when it comes to bringing people together. It won't happen that way. They don't have the spirit. And those who ride in any of those wagons are dead souls too. Dead souls. First of all, and I'm going to conclude this short talk, you're going to have to speak a common language here. And you're going to have to strip away all of the unnecessary nonsense. And you're going to have to do it locally. right there on your street. If you can't organize 2 or 3 people on your street, I mean right there on your street, to start sweeping the street, to start finding what needs to be fixed on your street, don't even think that you can organize on a state or federal level. You just don't get it. I am Dr. Stephen Nur Ahmed. Peace be unto you.